Imagine you are walking down the aisle of a modern grocery store. You see endless rows of soft, sliced, perfectly baked loaves. You grab a loaf of white bread without a second thought. It is cheap, abundant, and completely normal. But step back in time, step way back. You are wandering through a wild, ancient landscape. There are no ovens, no yeast packets, and no fields of golden wheat. There is only wild grass swaying in the wind. How did early humans figure out how to turn hard, inedible grass seeds into soft, fluffy bread long before farming even existed? It is one of the most counterintuitive inventions in human history. To make bread, you cannot just pick something off a tree and eat it like an apple. You have to harvest tiny seeds. You have to separate them from their tough casings. You have to grind them into a fine powder. You have to mix that powder with water, let it ferment, and then bake it at a high temperature. It is a complex chemical process, yet humans were doing this thousands of years before they invented the wheel. In fact, evidence suggests we were baking bread over 14,000 years ago. That is long before the first pyramids were built. It is long before writing was invented. The first problem was the grass itself. Wild wheat and barley do not look like food. Their seeds are tiny. They are wrapped in a tough, unchewable husk. If you try to eat them raw, they will break your teeth. They offer almost zero nutritional value to a human stomach in their natural state. We simply cannot digest raw grass seeds. Early foragers had to realize that these annoying little seeds hid a secret. The solution was crushing them. They found heavy, flat stones. They used smaller stones to pound and grind the seeds. This took hours of backbreaking labor. We know this because archaeologists have looked at the skeletons of ancient people. The bones of ancient women often show severe wear and tear on their knees and lower backs. This was from spending hours kneeling on the ground, grinding grain every single day. But it worked. The tough casings broke away. The starchy insides were crushed into a coarse, dusty powder. This was the first flour, but you cannot eat dry flour. The second problem was turning that dust into calories. They had to mix it with water from a nearby river or spring. This created a thick, sticky paste. If you eat raw flour paste, you will get very sick. The human stomach struggles to break down raw flour. It has to be cooked. But they did not have metal pans or clay ovens. They had fire. They gathered river stones and placed them directly into the glowing embers. Once the stones were scorching hot, they pulled them out using wooden sticks. They slapped the wet paste right onto the hot rocks. The heat quickly baked the paste into a hard, charred crust. It was not soft. It was not fluffy. It was a dense, heavy flatbread, but it was packed with energy. It kept people alive during harsh winters when hunting was poor. Then came the biggest mystery of all, the rise. For thousands of years, humans ate flat, dense bread. How did it become the light, airy loaves we know today? The answer is a beautiful accident. Imagine a bowl of dough left out in the warm sun. Maybe a hunter gathered too much flour and water, mixed it, and forgot about it. The air around us is filled with invisible life. Wild yeast and bacteria float on the wind everywhere we go. These tiny organisms landed in the wet dough. They found a paradise of wet starch. They started eating the sugars in the flour. As they ate, they burped out carbon dioxide gas. The gas became trapped in the sticky dough. The dough began to swell and bubble. It smelled slightly sour. To a primitive human, this bubbling mass might have looked ruined or rotten. But someone decided to bake it anyway. When they put this ruined dough by the fire, it did not turn into a hard brick. The trapped gas expanded in the heat. It pushed the dough upward. The result was a soft, airy texture. They had discovered leavened bread without knowing what yeast even was. Let us picture a gathering in the ancient Middle East. It is a cool evening, about 14,000 years ago. A small tribe known today as the Natufians has set up camp. A woman sits by a fire pit. She holds a heavy basalt stone in her hands. She grinds wild grains she gathered from the nearby hills earlier that day. Her shoulders ache from the repetitive motion. Next to her, a small pit is filled with hot coals and flat stones. She gathers the coarse flour she just made. She mixes it with water from a leather pouch. She adds a pinch of old, fermented dough from the day before to help the new batch rise. She forms the dough into small, flat circles. She gently places the dough onto the hot stones in the fire. The smell of roasting grain fills the night air. The tribe gathers around. They share this warm, charred flatbread along with roasted meat. This bread is not just food. It is a reason to gather, to sit still, to build a community around a shared fire. For a long time, historians thought humans learned to farm first, and then invented bread. We assumed agriculture came first. But modern discoveries flipped that idea upside down. We found burned breadcrumbs in ancient fireplaces that predate agriculture by thousands of years. We did not invent bread because we started farming. We started farming because we loved bread. Gathering wild grass was too slow. People wanted more flour. They wanted more bread. So they started planting the wild seeds closer to home. They protected the fields from animals. They built permanent houses near their crops. Bread literally tied us to the land. We stopped wandering. The desire for bread gave birth to villages, then cities, then empires. It changed our bodies too. As we ate more bread, our biology adapted. Humans developed special enzymes in our saliva just to break down complex starches. We evolved to eat the very thing we invented. Whole civilizations were built on the back of grain. The Mesopotamians built massive granaries to store wheat. Bread became the first true currency. If you controlled the grain, you controlled the people. The ability to store food in the form of grain meant that for the first time in history, not everyone had to spend all day looking for food. Because a few farmers could grow enough wheat to feed 100 people, those other people were free to do other things. Some became potters, some became soldiers, some became priests, and some became kings. Bread created social classes. The rich ate fine, white bread made from heavily sifted flour. The poor ate dark, coarse bread filled with grit from the grinding stones. That grit wore down their teeth over a lifetime. You can actually look at an ancient skull and guess the person's social class just by looking at how worn their teeth are. The ancient Egyptians even paid their pyramid builders in loaves of bread and jugs of beer. The Roman Empire controlled its vast population by handing out free bread to the citizens in the capital. Without the discovery of how to turn grass into bread, human civilization as we know it would not exist. They looked at dry, tough grass and saw a meal that would change the world. You look at a plastic bag on a supermarket shelf and just see a quick sandwich. Next time you take a bite of toast, remember the thousands of years of crushed stones, wild yeast, and ancient fires that made it possible.